House with empty windows. It is said that sometimes buildings preserve the memory of the events that took place in them. But what if a house becomes a trap that feeds on the fear of those who dare to cross its threshold? This is the story about an old house with empty windows that changed the life of one young man forever. Liam was an ordinary student from a small town. One summer evening, he decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to get away from his studies. His attention was drawn to an old abandoned building on the outskirts of town. It was a huge two-story building with dark windows that resembled empty eye sockets. As a child, he was told legends about this house. People said that a family used to live here, but they just disappeared one night. No trace, no explanation, just an empty house and always open windows, even on the coldest days. Liam decided to get closer. His friends had always teased him about being afraid of the dark, and now he wanted to prove to himself that he wasn't. He entered the abandoned yard. The air became heavy, and it suddenly became very quiet around him. Even the birds singing had stopped. "It's just an abandoned house," Liam said to himself. But as he approached the door, a light flashed in the windows on the second floor. It was weak, dim, like an old lamp. Liam felt a cold sweat on his back. He stopped and looked up. Someone seemed to be standing in the window on the second floor. The figure was blurry, but he could definitely see something or someone watching him. Suddenly the door creaked and opened on its own. Liam took a step back, but it was as if something was pulling him inside. "It's just the wind," he thought. But his heart was beating harder and harder. He went in. Everything inside was covered with a thick layer of dust. The furniture was broken, the floor creaked under his feet. But the worst thing was that all the windows were open, and a strong wind was pulling from outside, which seemed to be breathing down his back. On the wall he saw an old family photo. Everyone in the photo was looking directly at Liam. His heart sank as he realized that their eyes were gradually changing. They were becoming dark and empty, just like the windows of the house. He heard a knock on the second floor. Liam decided to check it out, even though inside he was begging to turn and run. As he climbed the creaking stairs, he saw a long corridor with doors that had been locked before. Now all the doors were open, and a soft whisper came from each room. He entered the first room and saw that it was empty except for an old mirror. Liam walked closer, and his reflection suddenly began to move by itself. It raised its hand, even though he hadn't done so. Then it smiled and pointed to a door at the end of the corridor. All the rooms were empty, but each was filled with the feeling of something invisible watching him. Liam felt his fear grow stronger with every step he took. When he got to the last door, it slammed on its own. Inside was only a small crib and broken toys on the floor. The window of this room was the only one closed. Suddenly the door behind him slammed shut. He rushed to it, but it would not open. In the mirror next to the crib, he saw the family figure from the photo. They stood behind him and looked directly into his eyes. Their empty eyes began to glow with a terrible red light. They didn't speak, but he heard voices in his head. "We have been waiting for you." The walls began to shrink, the windows expanded, and long dark arms reached out, trying to grab Liam. Liam tried unsuccessfully to kick the door, but it wouldn't budge. His heart was pounding, and the voices in his head were getting louder. The whispers merged into a loud hum that sounded like mocking laughter. He turned to the mirror and saw the family in the photo moving. They were walking toward him, but their faces were twisted, with empty eyes and crooked smiles. Suddenly the mirror shattered into thousands of pieces, and Liam felt something grabbing his legs. The floor beneath him became soft, like a swamp, and he began to sink. Dark hands pulled him down, into a darkness that smelled of dampness and rot. "You are one of us now," The voice in his head became almost deafening. Before he disappeared into the darkness, Liam saw his reflection in the shards of the mirror standing calmly and smiling. It was him, but with empty eyes. His reflection slowly walked over to the window, looked out at the empty street, and opened it. The house plunged back into silence. But now everyone who passed by could see Liam in the windows. He stood there, motionless, looking at the passers-by with a cold smile. The townspeople began to notice that people were disappearing around the house more often. Some heard their names whispered by voices from inside. One day, a young couple looking for a place to sleep decided to enter the house. No one saw them again. But the next morning, 2 new figures appeared in one of the windows. Now the house had more eyes watching the world outside. The legend of the house with empty windows spread far beyond the town. It is said that anyone who looks at the house for too long begins to hear a whisper calling him or her to enter. And anyone who crosses the threshold becomes part of this cursed place forever. A house with empty windows never leaves its guests. Everyone who enters stays there, their souls drawn into the darkness. So the next time you see an old abandoned building with open windows, you'd better turn back. Because maybe someone is already watching you from the window.